Theopoetics is discovering God not only through doctrine, but also through our stories, our creativity, our scars, our joy, and the sacred rhythm of everyday life. Theopoetics in glitter is my embodiment of that truth. So now I just shine not for attention, but to reflect what I carry, the light. So welcome back to Theopoetics in Glitter. In episode 1, we explored self-definition through the story of Hagar. In episode 2, we explored divine recognition through the Syrophoenician woman. 3 was survival and flourishing through the story of Bathsheba. Today, we want to talk about building block number 4, which is sacred storytelling. My testimony got pressure on it. Now, if that sounds intriguing to you, I actually have a sermon of that name. It is on my YouTube channel. Yeah, go look it up. Anyway, this building block recognizes that our stories matter, okay? Our stories matter. The lessons we've learned matter. The wisdom that we carry matters. Womanist theology teaches us that storytelling is more than just communication. Storytelling is resistance. It's healing. It's memory. Storytelling is identity. It's survival. Now, our guide today for this particular building block is the Syrophoenician woman. Now, I don't know if y'all know much about the Syrophoenician woman, but the Syrophoenician woman, you can find her story in Mark 7, verses 24 through 30. Now, the Syrophoenician woman comes to Jesus and she is asking for help for her daughter. Now, why is she asking for help for her daughter? Her daughter has an unclean spirit. I heard somebody say it in a way that really resonated with me. I think it was the Reverend Dr. E. Dewey Smith. And he said her daughter was a freak. That's what he said, an unclean spirit. So this is a mother who goes to Jesus because she done heard talk around town that Jesus is out here casting things out and making people see and bringing people back to life and this and that and the other thing. So she went on over there and she needed to talk to him about her daughter. And when she started talking to him, he didn't seem to be he told her no and called the crumbs and dogs and all that. You got to read it for yourself. Read it for yourself. But at the end of the day, she told her story. She told her story when people wanted her to be quiet. She told her story. She advocated for her daughter. Now, in womanist theology, the practice of storytelling is for preserving, honoring, and interpreting personal and communal experiences as sources of wisdom, healing, resistance, identity, and spiritual truth. Remember, I said early, my testimony got pressure on it. Sometimes when you tell your story, not only are you setting yourself free, you are setting other people free. For centuries, Black women were denied access to institutions where history was officially recorded. We were not allowed to publish books and were excluded from theological discourse. Many were denied opportunities to tell their own stories. Now, when we look at our current His story, and I choose to call it that because it is missing some elements to be considered 100% actual. I heard somebody refer to it as Americana as opposed to American history. And when you are not telling the full story, somebody's testimony, somebody's story of survival, somebody's story of triumph, somebody's story of sacrifice, or whatever their story is of, that story is left out, and everybody's story matters. That's how we get a full picture when we tell everybody's story. That's how we get the picture. Okay, we get a full picture through testimonies and songs, prayer meetings, through kitchen table conversations, through front porch wisdom. I don't know about y'all, but I grew up in a place where sometimes people would be sitting on the porch shelling peas or snapping beans, and that's when they would tell the stories of trial and triumph, and they would tell the family stories and the funny stories and all of those things, and storytelling became a repository of survival knowledge. Sacred storytelling reminds us that our stories have value. Our experiences contain wisdom. Our testimonies may become somebody else's survival guide. Sacred storytelling is the belief that our stories matter because God has been present in it every step of the way, even those darkest times. It is the practice of telling the truth about your life, not to stay stuck in your pain, but to recognize God's faithfulness, to reclaim your voice, and to help others find hope. You have to sometimes get to a point where you can extract the pain from your story and keep the lessons. That is when you have moved into a place of healing. And that is a place where we need to be when we begin to tell our stories. It's more than just talking about what happened to you. It is asking questions like, where was God when I felt all alone? How did I survive what should have broken me? What have I learned that can help somebody else survive? How has God transformed my pain into purpose? In womanist theology, telling your story is an act of courage. It refuses to let shame have the final say. I am more than what happened to me, is what sacred storytelling reminds us of. It honors the resilience that God has placed within us and reminds us that our lives are living testimonies of God's grace. When we share our stories in safe and loving communities, healing becomes possible, not only for the person telling their story, but for the person who hears it. Someone else's testimony may give another person the strength that they need just to keep going one more day, the courage to speak up, or the faith to believe that God will show up for them too. At the heart of it, sacred storytelling is about remembering that your story is holy because your life is holy. Every chapter, even the painful ones, can become a testimony of God's presence, power, and promise. As scripture reminds us in Psalm 107:2, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. That invitation belongs to everybody, especially those whose stories have been overlooked, and extremely so for those whose stories have been intentionally silenced. The Syrophoenician woman enters the biblical narrative carrying multiple burdens. She's a woman in a patriarchal society. She's a Gentile in a predominantly Jewish religious context. She's a mother carrying concern for her daughter. She occupies the margins, yet she refuses to remain silent. This alone is remarkable. Throughout history, marginalized people have often been expected to remain quiet. Womanist theology recognizes silence as one of oppression's favorite tools. If people can be silenced, their stories can disappear. If they can be silenced, their stories disappear. Then their humanities become easy to ignore. If you erase somebody's story, then you can limit them to nothing more than stereotypes. And when you limit them to nothing more than stereotypes, it's easy to ignore and or hate them. The Syrophoenician woman refused to be silent. She tells her story. She advocates for her daughter. She refuses to be dismissed. This is sacred storytelling in action. Her testimony becomes an act of resistance. Her voice becomes an instrument of liberation for her daughter. One of the most fascinating aspects of this passage is the dialogue between Jesus and the woman. She is 10 toes down. She does not retreat. She does not surrender. She remains engaged. She responds. She reasons. She persists. And I can't help but think right now of Nolan Wells' mom. She is persistent. She is persistent in advocating for her son. I pray her strength. I pray that she gets to tell her story. She gets to put out the story of who her son was, who her son is, now that he has crossed over. This woman, this Syrophoenician woman, is often thought of as demonstrating theological intelligence, courage, and agency in her conversation with Jesus. She speaks her truth even when power dynamics suggest that she should remain silent. How many people today have been taught to minimize your experience? Have you heard? Don't talk about that. It wasn't that bad. Get over it. Why don't you just stop living in the past? Yet healing only begins when people tell the truth. Sacred storytelling requires honesty, not perfection, not performance. Truth about our pain, our struggles, the truth about our victories, the truth about the faithfulness of God. This woman, this I'm not gonna edit it out. This womanist building block is woven throughout Black history. Our ancestors told stories because official history ignored them. Enslaved people shared stories of survival. Families, I can't talk today. Families shared stories of migration. Churches shared stories of deliverance. Civil rights activists shared stories of courage. Black women passed wisdom from generation to generation through testimony. Many of us know family stories that never appeared in textbooks, stories of perseverance, sacrifice, faith, dignity, triumph. These stories became the roadmaps for survival. They reminded future generations that it was possible. If they did it, we can do it too. Storytelling preserved identity when institutions attempted erasure and still attempt erasure. They preserve hope when circumstances encourage despair. Our stories preserve memory when society prefers that we forget. Many people today, especially today, feel that our history is being questioned, there's an attempt to erase it. It is under debate. There are ongoing conversations about whose stories deserve attention and whose history matters, whose experiences should be remembered, whose voices should be heard. For many communities, this feels familiar. Our ancestors understood the danger of forgotten stories. When stories disappear, lessons disappear. Those who forget their past are destined to repeat it. When lessons disappear, injustices are repeated. Those who forget their past are destined to repeat it. When lessons disappear, storytelling becomes an act of stewardship. It says we will remember, we will tell the truth, we will honor those who came before us. We will preserve wisdom for those who come after us. The lessons from our ancestors will not disappear. It won't just be nostalgia. We have a responsibility. We have been entrusted with these stories. We must decide what we will do with them. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with mine. I'm going to tell them. That's what I'm going to do. How can this womanist building block strengthen self-esteem? When you tell your story, it reminds you of who you are. When you tell your story, it reminds you of what you have overcome. When you tell your story, it reminds you of the grace that was extended to you, the faith that you embodied, the strength that it took for you to make it through what you made it through. Sacred storytelling is important. So please do not die with your story inside of you. Write it down, record it. Do whatever you have to do. I got books all over the place that I have told my children when I'm out of here, which ones to police up and which ones to use to tell my story. The other thing that you can do to use this building block for your self-esteem is to listen to the stories of others. Sacred storytelling also requires that you are listening. When you hear other people's stories, not only does it give you hope and encouragement, but it gives you ideas on how to make it through what you're going through. Now, some of the ways that you can preserve your family's stories is by interviewing your elders, right? Write that stuff down. Take pictures. Have somebody write just little episodic stories from their lives. And then share the lessons that you learn. Somebody needs to hear that. And I will tell you something, because I share all my stuff. I ain't got nothing but testimony. I ain't got no secrets. And when I share my testimony and someone is encouraged, then I know that it had purpose. And it makes me feel better, therefore increasing my self-esteem, because I was able to use something that was meant to destroy me to encourage somebody else. And then when you tell your story and you listen to the story of others, it helps you to remind people of God's faithfulness and how God showed up in your life, and you can celebrate that. Now, I'm going to just share with you the reflection questions that we have for today, okay? What stories shaped your understanding of yourself? What stories shaped your understanding of yourself? Baby, let me tell you something. If the stories that shaped your understanding of yourself come from people who don't love you, then your understanding of yourself will be distorted. Okay? So this is the reason why Sacred storytelling requires truth. Okay, next. What stories from your family need to be preserved? Baby, can I tell you one? Can I tell you a recent story from my family? Mm-hmm. My oldest daughter is a historian, and she has discovered a lot of things about our family as she was getting her master's in history. She is a public historian. She is connected with a whole lot of historical societies. Okay. Anyway, long story shorter, because it's still gonna be long. Her sister and her niece, my daughter and granddaughter, were models for a public art exhibit that is within visual distance of the water from where our ancestors disembarked the slave ships. So that is a story that needs to be preserved in our family. And I have written about it, oh my gosh, so many times. And well, only 3. I'm going to write about it some more, obviously. But other people are also writing about it. So this is a story, even though they don't know the personal angle, but there will be, proof of that story. Anyway, number 3, where have you been tempted to remain silent? Where have you been tempted to remain silent? Now, I'm going to tell you this one will be quick. Really, for real. Very recently, within the last 3 years, I remained silent about something. And something that could have ended someone's career, I remained silent about it, and that person tried to end mine. Number 4, what wisdom have you gained through struggles? Child, I could be talking all night about that. In a way, the last question, how can your testimony encourage someone else? I could also talk all night about that, and I won't. But because I have a lot of stories, not much. I don't know if she had a lot of stories, but the story of the Syro-Phoenician woman teaches us that stories have power. She possessed no official authority, no political influence, no religious office, yet her voice changed the future of her daughter. Her story survived for generations, and today, thousands of years later, we are still learning from her courage. That is the power of sacred storytelling. Our ancestors understood this truth. They told stories in fields, in kitchens, on porches, in churches, at family reunions. If you grew up like I grew up, you may have heard Uncle Remus. You may have heard of Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox. You may have heard of the signifying monkey and all these if you've heard of that, all of that is stories that have been passed down. In freedom songs, there are stories. In testimony services, there are stories. They told stories because they understood that stories preserve identity, memory, and faith. And stories remind us who we are when the world tries to tell us that we ain't nothing. As we navigate uncertain times, may we honor the legacy of our ancestors by telling our stories and telling them truthfully. May we preserve wisdom, remember our history, and share our truth. May we refuse silence, because every story of survival becomes a witness. Every story of healing becomes a ministry. Every story of faith is a testimony. And every testimony declares that God has been with us all along. So I'm going to end this the way I always do. Remember that you can eat the entire world one bite at a time. Until the next time, remember that your story matters, your voice matters, your testimony matters. And what God has done in your life deserves to be remembered. Deuces.